Yeah, we want to go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for being here this afternoon. My name is Deborah Jackson. I serve as the Managing Director of the Center for Law, Equity, and Race. And we are pleased to have one of our faculty co-directors here joining us today, Professor Margaret Burnham. And this is part of a program that we have been very excited about, is our faculty fellow. And so this year we have had Quisquella Addison as the fellow, and she's been doing some very exciting work that you will hear about. The topic of the presentation is Training for Trust, Supporting Organizational Clients Through Community-Centered, Culturally Responsive Practice. And so she will tell us what that means, how it works, and how we should be able to do it in terms of engaging students as they deal with community groups, both here as well as abroad. She will be joined by Professor Jill Dupree, who's the Associate Teaching Professor of Economics at the School of Social Sciences and Humanities. And we have a special guest who is joining us via Zoom, Dimitri Sisi Kulana Geda, who is an author, gender activist, and a genocide survivor from Rwanda. So this time I will turn it over to Quisquella. Thank you so much for being here, and we think this will be a very exciting and informative presentation. Thank you. Quisquella?
Thank you so much. Okay, let me just share my screen. What I'm trying to figure out is if from there I'll be able to change the slides. How many students have taken class in this room? You know how it is, right? Your professors always have a problem. Okay, well, I'm going to do it the way that I'll do it, and I'll go back and forth from here. So part of
We can help.
Oh, okay, thank you. Thank you so much. So the way this came about is over the last 3 years, I've been traveling to Rwanda on different experiences. And 3 years ago, the law school funded me to be able to go to Rwanda to do a leadership exchange. And as we're engaging in that leadership exchange, I started to think about community, trust, and how do we work with organizational clients who are embedded within communities. And that was really important to me because my background is community lawyering and client-centered lawyering, and really thinking about, okay, how are the interventions that we are engaging in actually responsive to the community needs, and how am I not the one at the forefront? And that was really important to me in my practice. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how that connects to economic development and theory, and you're going to see that you'll see the connections. But we're going to talk about that in terms of how we're going to do this work in a dialogue civilization, which is a program in the undergraduate school, which we'll be doing in Rwanda over the summer. So this, well, you don't need to read all that. All of this comes from my work with legal skills and social context. I'm really grateful for our Center for Law, Equity, and Race for funding so that I could go and do a little bit more research and also present some of this work at the Global Legal Skills Conference, and also the Global Exchange Office for supporting our dialogue of civilization and supporting us in doing this work for this summer and hopefully next summer. You can do the next slide. So just think about roadmap. What I'm going to do, the way that I'm going to put this presentation is it's going to be, I'm going to do things that I would do in the classroom. So it's not just going to be talking at you about theory. It's going to be, these are activities we do in the classroom. We don't have time to do the activities, so I'm not going to ask you to do them. I'm just going to show you some examples. Because part of what I'm trying to do is build self-awareness, because I think that's key to first, as we're thinking about cultural competency and cultural humility, and then trust. What does that mean? So we'll have that. We'll talk a little bit about our own goals for the dialogue of civilization. And then we're going to talk about economic development theory. And that will be Professor Dupree will talk about that. And we'll have our distinguished guest, who I'm really excited that she could be here, Dimitri Sisi, and I'm sorry I'm going to missay your last name, Mukani Ligera. She's going to be here and talk a little bit about her work with the World Bank and also her work with just gender activism, and how she's done a lot of different things. She's a very impressive person. So we can do the next one, and then we're going to have some reflections. So let me just tell you, Part of what I think that this is required to do this work, to actually do community-centered, client-centered work, is for you to understand your intrinsic values, who you are, what you believe in, what you care about, but really build your own self-awareness. And so I do different activities in the classroom, which some students know and like, some students don't love, but it's okay. And so I always want you to think about, what is your intention? I think whenever you're doing anything, when you're reading a book, when you're sitting in a workshop, when you're sitting, I don't know, when you're just sitting and talking to somebody, like, what is the intention in this moment? What am I hoping to do? Right now, I'm hoping to connect with you. We're going to have a dialogue about how do we talk about cultural competency, cultural awareness, trauma-informed practice. I'm hoping that this will grow and build into something else, right? That hopefully this will be something that will be across all of this university. But I do think it's important to know your why and whenever you're engaging with the new process. I'm not going to ask you to do this, but this would be an activity that I would ask students to do, because I really, the self-awareness is going to keep coming back because I do believe in it very strongly. One of the activities that I had the opportunity to do because of the Clear Fellowship funding was I was able to attend a train-the-trainer conference through the National Legal Aid and Defense Association. And one of the things that they had us do was, how do you do effective training? And I really wanted to build that into this work. And so one of the things they had us do, which was very uncomfortable for me, was we had a sheet of paper with all these different identities. And we had to circle them, and we had to find somebody who we thought shared that identity with us. It was very uncomfortable, because it was, imagine every single identity that you might possibly imagine, and then having to connect with somebody about that, and not really knowing if that's true, right? We understand that our identities have to come from a social context, and we all heard that, yes, race, gender, all of these things within a social context. I don't really think that we truly understand it deeply when we're going to a new social context. And I think that it's a really challenge for students. And so one of the things that I will have students do is do this in a circle as opposed to doing it as a sheet of paper, but just draw a circle. And inside of it, what are all the identities that you would say are, that you would identify with? And it could be any one of them. And then I want them really to think about which one of those identities specifically have to do with where they were born. Because a lot of them do, right? My first time going to Rwanda as a Black woman in the United States, I go to Rwanda, nobody was like, I'm a Black woman. Like, you're American. I was like, of course I'm American, sure. But I was like, then what? And then I was thinking, wait, who am I? What am I? And then I started thinking about my own background and what does that mean? And that's really simple, and I know that sounds silly, but I do think that it's a challenge for students when they go to other contexts to really understand that their ideas of race, gender, sexuality, all of these identities are really social constructs. And if that's true, then they have to sort of be open and aware and understanding when they enter a new context, because it does make a huge difference. It was really, I mean, I found it interesting. There were 3 Asian students. One was, 2 were Chinese, and one was Indian. And coming into Rwanda in that moment, people identified him as white, and them as white. And they had to think about, what does that mean in this context? Well, in this context, why would that be? And so how do we understand that? And what does that mean for my own identity? Did my identity change because I crossed borders? I don't know, right? So, but I do want the students to be aware of that, because I think the self-awareness is important for the next step. So the program we're doing is called Economic Development of Rwanda. And it's a project-based model with case studies. And so we're gonna have 4 different community-based organizations that specifically are created by and for individuals who are impacted by the issues that the organizations are served, right? So organizations that deal with entrepreneurship, deal with gender-based violence, that deal with early childhood education. The founders are specifically people who are from the communities they're serving, and they determine that the needs that they are meeting are from that community. And it's part of the model that Jill and I are thinking about, the small, local, sustainable. We do believe that the solutions are coming from within the communities, and that we should be supporting that as opposed to imposing our own ideas of what development should look like, what lawyering should look like, what community impact should look like. So these are goals for me. I haven't really, Jill and I haven't talked about these goals, but these are the goals for me. I want to prepare students for ethical, effective international partnerships. I want them to be able to reflect on identity, power, and historical context as we're doing this work. I want them to think about these guiding principles, which I'll talk about later, and then we're going to explore these case studies and cultural frameworks. And one of the reasons why I'm thinking about the prepare part is because when I first went to Rwanda, somebody asked me, are you a global citizen? And I didn't know really what to say. I had traveled, not a lot, but I had traveled at least to where my family had come from, but I couldn't answer that question because I didn't think that I just didn't think I could in that moment. Didn't think that I had the awareness to be able to do that and answer that question. So I do want us to engage with that discussion. So what is the first thing you think about when you think about Rwanda? Don't look at those. What's the first thing you think about when you think about Rwanda? I want you to be honest. Yes.
War.
War.
Violence.
Okay. Genocide, right? And that's what students are going to come in with it. So we're going to be thinking, right? And I think that as a teenager and during the genocide, that was the first interaction that I had with Rwanda. And so what I wanted to also think of, right? Fashion. I asked somebody, I said, I'm going to Rwanda. And they were like, oh, that's the Paris of Africa. I was like, I don't know what that means, but okay, sure. The fashion is fantastic. It's phenomenal. It's gorgeous. You have one of she's modeling one of the outfits. I actually wore one to a presentation I did last year. These are outfits that nobody else will have, and it's really exciting to be able to travel around the world and say, yes, I had this made. Coffee, the arts, and then colonial legacy, right? I think one of the things that really surprised students that were on the delegation that I was with previously was about the colonial legacy of imposing ethnic divisions, of creating these ethnic identities. And then thinking about, obviously we think about genocide, rebuilding, the peace and reconciliation process. But I think part of this trust that we're thinking about is through humility and relationship building. So we do have to actually understand this and know this, and also think about what is the expanded view we can have of the nation. Just want to put beautiful pictures. That's it. This is your golly. God. Just want to show beautiful pictures. I had a really great opportunity of meeting with different impact organizations, and they were doing innovation work. It was through partly Jill's connections that we made throughout the country. A lot is happening in Rwanda right now. It's a very interesting time to be there. And so these are some of the places I've been there. But also Norskin. Where do you think Norskin comes from? Maybe, well, the name is right, Scandinavian. So there are a lot of individuals and organizations that are coming in to engage in innovation. And there's a lot of things that are happening from the outside in. But there's also some things within that we're going to be talking about a little bit about from within. And so what can we think about within? How can I support that and not be just an outsider that's trying to impose my own values and ideas? So I'm really thinking about that. But it was very interesting to see the number of different international agencies and entities that were doing work in Rwanda during this time. And this is Ruhango, and we're going to be spending some time in Ruhango. We're going to be there for 2 days. And our students are going to work with an NGO called, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about later, the Nganondota Initiative. And they work with over 300 different youth who are entrepreneurs. And those entrepreneurs are working on everything from goat herding to rabbit raising to basket weaving. And then there's also cooperatives that are very advanced that are doing a really interesting work. And this is specifically within these communities. It was created by a group of individuals who were impacted by the genocide, and they determined the basis of the work that they wanted to do. So, I didn't think about that. Okay, so one of the things I want to just talk about, when I talk about trust, I'm saying I think it requires presence. I think it requires being there with someone in that moment. And it's going to be the same as many of you are law students when you're working with clients. Right? You have to, for you to build trust, you need to be present, you need to be there. You can't just be staring at the screen while you're taking notes from the client's case, right? You need to be listening, engaging with them. And one of the hardest parts is going to be is just learn how to listen. One of the things that I realized, I talk very fast. And so when I get to Rwanda and people are translating for me, I have to slow down. And I also have to not speak right away. Just sit in the silence and let people reflect and engage. And that's part of me also becoming more culturally humble, if that ever can happen completely. So, but thinking about follow through. If I say I'm going to do something, I do it. A lot of this comes from the speed of trust. I'm really obsessed with this right now. And I've just been obsessed with some of the reading I've been doing over the last year. But just thinking about follow through. If I say I'm going to do something, then I do it. If I'm not going to do it, then I explain why not. Why did it not work? What can we do? I don't just drop that whatever the exercises that I'm engaging with, right? And respect, and building mutual respect. Cultural humility, and I want this to be clear, this is all continuous. It doesn't stop. You're not going to ever just be culturally humble or have cultural humility. You're going to be engaging in that process. You all are required to have cultural competence, right? Which I think is like bare minimum. Yeah, pretty bare minimum. But you're going to be engaging in a process, right? And it's about self-reflection. It's about openness. Trauma-informed practice, it's going to require you to actually recognize and honor historical wounds. That means that you're sitting with someone. I mean, the first time that I sat with somebody who was dealing with domestic violence, and we were working on an immigration case. I sat with her for 2 hours, just letting her cry, because that's what I had to do. Okay, honestly, I had a huge caseload. You all are gonna have huge caseloads. It's gonna be a lot of work, but you just have to sit sometimes, and you just have to sit and listen and accompany someone. And this idea, this model came from, honestly, from Latin America. When I was doing work there, it's called acompañar. Te voy a acompañar en tus sentimientos. So when somebody passes away, they say, te acompaño en tus sentimientos. I am with you, I accompany you in that moment. But it's also with legal, they call it legal accompaniment. I'm accompanying you in a process. I'm accompanying you through this really hard time in your life. And that's part of what we're thinking about when we're thinking about trauma-informed practice, is you still have to recognize that these wounds exist as you're still engaging with the individual. And when we think about allyship, we throw out allyship all the time. But it's ongoing, it's continuous. You've all heard this before. It doesn't stop. I'm sorry, we're not all allies. We are engaging in a process of allyship, and we're going to keep working at it, and we're not going to stop. And that's part of what lawyering requires of us, and part of what advocacy is going to require of us. Let me just make sure. Okay. So I think some people most of you read this article. A lot of this comes from Gordon, Quigley, Goodridge, all of those people that you've read in the first year, right? We are not the protagonist. We are facilitator of a process. That's what we're doing. That's what we're here for. And it requires humility, deep listening, and the willingness to let communities lead, even when it challenges conventional legal strategies. And I know we're talking about economic development as well, but I think it challenges conventional economic strategies as well. Because if we think we know what success looks like, and we think we try to impose what success could be on others, then we are disempowering them. And part of what we're trying to engage in this process is agency, and working with community agency. And we're just helping clients and communities become their own advocates. If you can see the power of community organizing, I think you are probably seeing this more now, especially. Communities can organize themselves. We can help in that work, but they know what they need and they know how to get it. So we should just be facilitators. And we're not heroes. So some of the challenges that I see, and I'm just gonna put these questions out there, we aren't answering them right now. Some of the challenges that I do see is that it is really hard to not jump in and be a problem solver. I think you all know, I think most of you are law students. One of the things I evaluate you on, and my colleagues do, is on problem solving skills. But you know what? I don't want my students in this program, or even in my LSSC project-based class, to come in and just try to solve problems. You don't know what the problems are yet. You don't understand what the issues are. You don't understand about the people who are impacted by these issues, right? I don't understand the issues that are of the people who are most impacted. So I gotta listen, I gotta take that time, and I have to engage. So part of this process, and I keep saying the same thing, I'm repeating myself, is self-awareness, it's humility, it's listening, and it's deep engagement. And then thinking about, like, what does it mean to engage with individuals and support individuals through a process when they have dealt with genocide? What does that mean for the way in which we engage in practice? So one of the ways that we were able to do this, which was really fun, was I was able to attend an international conference on women and gender studies. And there were 100 different organizations. Every single person I spoke to talked about climate change, and talking about the impact of climate change on their life in this moment. And I think that's something that we're not doing here. And so what I think is we assume that people don't understand the issues that are impacting them, but every single woman there could tell me how climate change was impacting their lives in this moment right now. Increases in domestic violence. Why? You can think about that. We don't have time to really get into why that is. But they had very specific issues. They knew what was happening, they knew what was lacking, and they knew what the solutions should be. But nobody was listening. So part of what this dialogue is also doing is thinking about what is the language of development that could be supportive and could help individual organizations as they are fighting for their rights. So what's really fun is I came in there like a lawyer. I came in there like, oh, I got a survey. So let me get a survey down because I think you've all done client surveys before. And I had a million questions. And the first person asked me, why are you asking me these questions? And the thing is, they knew that I was coming there to specifically talk to them about their organization. But they were just like, and who is this going to? And why is it, what are you using it for? And why? Because I hadn't built trust. And so that's why I think it just all comes back to that. And we really need to think about that. What's the work that we're going to do to engage and to build that trust? I should not have come out there with like a 20-question survey. I did not need all that information, but I truly was interested. I deeply wanted to know more, but I could have done it in phases. I could have done it in a process. And so part of it, what we're doing is going to also be working on that. So I'm going to go through these quickly, the case study. So we've gone on with that initiative. It's called Dream Generation. I love how Dream Generation is like almost universal international now. Like it's just beautiful. So the young entrepreneurs, they have worked with over 300 youth around Ruhango, which is one of the poorest areas in Rwanda. You can go ahead. And what I want to focus them on is what are they saying are their measures of success? What is a holistic view of the individual, the young person? And they're thinking about healthy habit, team approach, capable hands, curious mind, courageous voice. How do you measure that in development speak? How do you measure that in legal speak? Like, how could I measure success in my interactions if this is what they see as success? I don't know how I would communicate that to an international funder. I don't know how I would communicate that to as a metric. I don't know how I would build that. But this is how they understand what they want. A growing account, a patient pocket, which means it has to do with saving and making sure that we're like being very sensitive in the way that we're using money. A creative plan, a spotting eye. What do you think spotting eye means? It's knowing where to find economic potential. It's knowing where to find a possible business idea. Like thinking, wait a minute, I see that there's a need for instance, there's a large someday agribusiness community that does not consume meat. And there's a tofu initiative. They decided we're going to start actually building a whole equipment for making tofu. And so they had tofu, and that's a spotting eye because they thought there's a need, we can fill it, and we know what it is, and we know what we can do about it. So I'm just thinking about that. We could go to the next one. Oops, personal wellness. So the second organization where we work with is another entrepreneurial organization that works with women specifically who have dealt with domestic violence and who are entrepreneurs. And they do sewing, they sew beautiful clothing. I have a really beautiful dress that I was able to get at one of their stores. They have a store in Kigali, and then they have, in the northern province, they have it's not really a factory, honestly. It's a room with people who are sewing and developing. And so the way that they see it is at the end, right, of their period of changes, it's community well-being. How do we measure community well-being? How do we think about that? Like, what would that look like? Do you think that you as lawyers, part of your job will be to support community well-being? Do you think your work will do that? I don't know. But part of thinking about economic development is thinking about how do we measure success? They measure success by community well-being, and they know what that looks like. And so listening to them and asking them, what does that look like? What do you think that success would look like? And so it's a beautiful organization. I'm very excited. What the students are going to do is, these organizations have asked us specifically, when I interviewed them and they told me I asked too many questions, they told me very specifically, you know what we want? We want help in telling our story. We want help in telling about what is the work that we do, what is the impact that it has, and why is it necessary? And part of the way that Jill and I are going to work with them is helping them think about, okay, what is some traditional development speak? What are some traditional ideas of success? And how can we talk about your story? But how do we think about mission, vision, your values, and your goals? But then after all of this, I start to think about, again, when I was working with a young person in Ruhango, the thing that I saw that shifted for that person was that they laughed. They smiled. They were playing. They were a 12-year-old that was not playing before, but when they went through the program, they were playing with other young people. They did not have a lot of access to other young people because we're in a very rural area and there were not very many houses nearby. How do I talk about that? How do I look for funding for that and think about that if I'm talking about that as a measure of success? Is joy a measure of success? Is it? Should we have a joy index? Should we think about that? I hope so. But I think also just having the support and the desire to keep going because you know that something is possible, something better is possible. Okay, I'm going to transfer off to Jill Dupree, who's going to talk about economic theory.
Okay, and I'm modeling my breath. Fashion is amazing in Rwanda, and people are they're so willing to interact and talk to you about ideas and come up with, like, I want a dress that does this and has this, and pick out, and they have, of course, the most beautiful fabrics. So that's my, like, I love to go there for fashion, so I love that. All right. I have been running this Dialogue of Civilization. I've run it twice before without Quisquella. myself, a graduate student, we did a class in economic development and a course on conflict economics, and interacted with the Ministry of Information Communication Technology, which is a primary government ministry that is really kind of the leader of the idea of economic development and what kinds of programs, and they're supported by many other ministries. But I ran that with that, through that organization, and we also worked with the UNHCR and refugees. And Rwanda is a country that is a bit of, well, I mean, there's a lot of paradoxes, but one is that there are many people who are there now who were refugees during the time of the genocide. And when we think about the genocide, we tend to focus on 1994, but the reality is people were fleeing as early as 1960 and earlier and leaving because there was a lot of violence between as the colonial structure broke down and left a bit of a vacuum. There was a lot of violence between Hutus and Tutsis, and so many people were fleeing the country. And so many people came back after or in support of the rebels or after the genocide, having been refugees. And so they have a strong sense of bringing them in, but there's also, just like we have here in the United States, all these people coming in and they're taking away jobs from us, and they're, so we say we want to make them a part of our country. We don't want them to be a part of our country all at the same time, right? So you have this conflict. And so those were things that I was doing, but frankly, my training in cultural awareness, cultural humility, is pretty slim. And so I felt that in the first 2 years that I ran it, but we had, I think, really good experiences for the students. I took a summer off, decided I wanted to do this again, but I needed support, and I'm so glad I found Quisquella, because this is going to change this dimension of this dialogue, so that I think it will be much more meaningful for students, okay? I'm still going to be teaching a development economics course, so I'm going to go through a basic idea here. But really what I'm doing is kind of saying that, the economist standard is to say economic development is economic growth. We measure it in usually GDP per worker. We have this nice little equation that says that there's technology or ideas times some combination of, and we like to use little k's, but that's just like physical capital per worker, the human capital per worker, natural resources, sort of the physical things that, and resources that workers have, times the ideas that tells you how much they produce, and the more they produce, the more developed they are, right? So, and so, the economic development has so focused on, well, let's just make sure we're increasing the amount of physical capital. Let's make sure we're increasing the education. Let's make sure, they're fully utilizing their natural resources. And then there's just these technologies and ideas out there that everybody knows, and they can just utilize them to figure out how to combine all those resources. And then they're on the path to development, right? And that's exactly that idea of sort of coming in from the outside, saying, here's what you need, and now you're all better, don't you, and then we know what the success rate has been on that, which is few and far between, really. And the countries that have been most successful when we think about it in this kind of model, Japan, Germany coming out of World War II, South Korea, not North Korea, they've done things really differently when you really dig into what they did. They didn't just, increase the amount of physical capital and improve the education system, and, they really did things in their own way. And then when you go back and you look at US history, right, we tend to think, a lot of economic development comes from, this is what the US economy looks like, and this is how we got here. And it's based upon a story of what we like to tell about ourselves, right? Just like so much other history. It's like, and these are these wonderful things, right? And we don't stop to think about, how much racism was fundamental in creating that opportunity. Who actually has those opportunities? Where does the growth occur? Things like that. And so when I think about development economics, I start with my students with this basic idea. It's just a good framework to kind of think about what's the language and what are the things you might want to think about. What is human capital, right? Is human capital having access to mental health resources that allow you to process your trauma so that you can be a more productive person in other ways, a more active and fulfilled person in other ways? What is that? Or is human capital just how many years of schooling have you had, or can you read or write? Let's think about these issues. How about physical capital per worker? What does that actually mean, and how do we measure those things? Right? So let's kind of step through these one at a time. So we'll stop there, right? So one of the things that I have real concern about, one is that we measure it in GDP, gross domestic product, which just focuses on the market production of goods and services, right? And in an economy, especially an economy like Rwanda, but in many economies, there's a very active informal sector that's not included in here. And so we don't even measure that. Right, and so when we think about how are you successful, there's a lot of focus on getting everything into this sort of formal market, okay? The idea that growth, increases in GDP are the only measure of development, right? That's the focus. And so if you start producing more goods and services in the formal market, then you're more developed, right? And we have to stop and kind of think about that, right? If you have a house, a world full of glass houses, and you just go around breaking more of the glass, so you have to produce more glass, then yeah, your GDP goes up. But does that mean you don't have any more housing? You don't have any better housing? You don't have any, anything else? So more GDP is not quite the same as more development, and I think we need to separate those things. That's one thing that's important. Okay. The other thing is that there's a really mixed match in terms of the empirics that just say if we just increase K and make sure that there's building ideas and technology, the economy is going to grow, and that there's a focus on the incentives, right? So we have markets that incentivize investment in physical capital, and so if you have those, then your capital stock will just grow. Well, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, and there's a whole lot of reasons why that is, right? Why some countries have been more successful than others at increasing their GDP, right? And increasing GDP, how well, the US is the highest income large country in the world, right? I don't know, are we more developed than every place else? Is a country that has, like Singapore has higher GDP per capita, right? Not total GDP, because they're a tiny state. Are they necessarily more developed than, Taiwan? I don't know, but we look at these numbers and we just assume that's the goal, is to just increase that GDP number. And I think that's a really hard problem, that growth equals development, and a lot of the empirical stuff just doesn't quite match up. Like the things that we think should work don't necessarily work, and the things that we don't think should work sometimes are effective. And so we need to take a bigger look or deeper look at that. Next, okay. So some things that I think are really missing here are, one is technological change, and that doesn't mean, there's lots of technology and ideas, but so much of this model is based upon the 50s and 60s in the United States, where we had large manufacturing companies that employed lots of people, and people had steady, blue collar strong income jobs. They could make a decent living. They could think about taking care of their families, all of those kinds of things. Well, that's not the way things are produced anymore. I mean, we're in a moment right now where we're saying, oh, we've got to bring back all this manufacturing to the United States. It's not going to create jobs. We might produce more here in the United States, but it's not going to create the kinds of jobs. And a country that is trying to develop now has to stop and think about that reality, right? China has more robots in manufacturing than any other country in the world. We think of them as, everything gets produced there because they've got cheap labor. They're not using that labor in manufacturing. They're using technology. So that kind of change says we've got to think broader about this, okay? Institutions, you guys are probably more familiar with this. My undergraduate students, I always have to tell them it's not organizations, it's sort of the rules of the game. The formal legal system kinds of rules and regulations, and the informal, how are things done, and how do we kind of survive. And so institutions are not really brought in here, and yet economists over and over again come back and say, if you don't have the right institutions, then you're not going to get the right incentives, and increasing physical capital or human capital or natural resources or even technology are not going to generate the kinds of growth that we would hope to get, right? So institutions are not in here, so they're kind of missing in this, okay? Local conditions, okay? So the other thing that we know that's really important are history and geography. And a small landlocked country like Rwanda has challenges that a small island nation doesn't have. So they could be the same size, they could have the same, physical capital, human capital, natural resources, and available technologies, but they're just going to face different challenges. And being able to kind of bring that in and understand what impact that is and being aware of that, okay? And that goes at all kinds of scales, from country to small community to individual, right? And then trust. And this is where, when we think about operating in a market and really saying, okay, market production is how we're going to be most efficient, this is what we need to do, markets require that people trust each other. It does require a framework that allows you to maybe build that trust and, and ensure that things are going, like we have contract law. People are going to follow through, or you have, remedy to that. But if you don't have trust to begin with, then expecting the market to be some magic operator in here is not actually going to meet what you need. And so thinking about those pieces are important, right? And so as I started building on this and working with Quisquella and thinking about what do we need to do, we started to think about, so what does it mean to be small, local, sustainable, right? If the magic, if the equation tells us everything we need to know about how to develop an economy. So go ahead. And so some things that I think are really important in terms of that small, local, sustainable is, the institutional form versus the function. And one of the things that I really worry about is we've got these UN agency, this Be Ready program that says, here's the institutional structures that you need to be business ready so that businesses can operate as effectively and as efficiently as possible at all different kinds of scales, right? And it's like a checklist. You go through and you have this and you have this and you have this. And so you can look, right? You can have passed all the laws. But if these things are not functioning in a way that is effective, it doesn't matter that you've got all the points for the checklist. It matters that you need to decide which of these kinds of institutional structures are going to be most important for your situation, your setting. How do they need to be structured? And so when we're thinking about working with the ministry on case studies, and they're all about innovation types of things. You know, what's important to Rwanda? What do they need? Is it different for different people? How do we kind of manage those things? And how do we make the form turn into effective function? Okay. There's an economist, Hernando de Soto. He's from Peru. He is the first one in the 70s and the 80s who kind of brought this up. And the first thing he recognized, and I think this is really important, is that there's a hugely vital informal sector in Peru. And this is true in many countries, and in developed and low-income countries as well, okay? That there are barriers to entry into the formal sector that mean that, this really vital informal sector requires lots of work and effort to keep it going and make it work. And if you could have access to some of the benefits of those formal sector, that would really be helpful. So how do we get rid of those barriers? And the other thing is what he called dead capital, and that was also the issue that a lot of low-income households and poor households have actually a lot of property ownership. It's just that it's not well formalized. And so you can't do some of the things we think of doing as economists, like using it for collateral to borrow some money to help build your business. Like that's like a next step up, because in so many places, even if you had that formal, we don't have a mechanism for you to make it be collateral, to be borrowed against, to help you build your business. But those are some things. And so he started this doing business, and the UN development program took that and created this doing business index, and countries got rated on it. And then a few years ago, whistleblowers came out and said, this country actually was paying us off and pressuring people to mark them up higher on the, doing business index. So they said, oh, we got to step back. They just reintroduced in 2024 a new program similar called Be Ready. It's very similar, but one of the things I think is really important is that it actually does look at, do they have the institutional form there? How well is it functioning? And does it actually meet the needs of people, and how do they do that? So we keep trying to measure it, but again, how do we measure some of these things? All right. Okay. The other thing we know is that, there's systemic discrimination in any set of institutions. And, I think we can't say, we come out and we say like, oh, the US is this model. Well, it's a model of systemic discrimination that we have to really step back and kind of think about is, again, it comes back to that, the form versus the function is, we've got all the right ideas, but does everybody really have true access to it? Do they really function properly? All those kinds of things. So I just kind of think we need to really listen to that local conditions and say, where are your barriers? What are the things that you need to be able to fully recognize your own level of success? Okay. And then there's Edward Banfield, who talks about immoral familialism, and his is a historical political science study, but it really focuses on the idea that in certain situations where people, the cultural background is you rely on the immediate effectiveness of your immediate family, and you expect everybody else is going to do the same, and so you get lots of corruption. The only people who are interested in politics or policy or leadership are the politicians, and they're doing exactly that. They're using it to make their own immediate family as effective as possible, and you get a real lack of trust. And so just sort of making the students aware of the idea that this trust is so important, and that when it breaks down, it's hard to rebuild, okay? And then we want to think about definitions of success, right? So we've got institutional form versus function, and making sure that we're really listening to people in their immediate situation and saying, what are your barriers? Okay, and how can your organization help to reduce those? But then we also need to think about definitions of success, and Amartya Sen is the economist I really like to go to here, and think about this idea of capabilities, where we don't measure success by GDP, but we measure success by looking at what are the opportunities that people have, what kinds of choices are available to them to make decisions about what success looks like in their own individual life, right? And, of course, the difficulty is we like to have numbers and measures and, and even Amartya Sen is like, just what are the capabilities that people get? If you give people, like classic examples of old school economic development was, let's go build a giant dam, hydroelectric dam. We'll provide electricity for the community. Nobody's trained on how to maintain the dam. It just kind of sits there, becomes this disaster waiting to crumble, and then you get your city washed out to sea. I mean, that happened, just a few years ago in, was it Tunisia? I don't remember now. But Libya, yeah, that's right. So nobody was keeping track of it. The dam bursts and it just wipes out, a whole community. So, does what if you come in from the outside and you just give people stuff, does it actually improve their capability, the choices that they have to make? The other example he uses is the bicycle. If you give a disabled person a bicycle and they are not able to actually use the bicycle, they now have more physical capital, but it doesn't make them more capable. And so I think really going in and taking this small, local, sustainable kind of mindset and saying, what is it that people need? And that's where I'm just so excited about having Quisquella come in and be able to kind of build some of those skills and help students start to be aware of that. And then they'll be working with the ministry on some case studies that are programs that the government is trying to put in place. And I think what we really want them to be taking a look at is where are these programs? What's their success, right? Is it building capabilities, or is it checking boxes on on the Be Ready business checklist? So they've got higher ranking in the Be Ready, but not really following through on making people more capable. Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I think we can stop sharing and then pin.
Yeah.
Sorry. Oh, very nice. So I want to introduce, pin her. Yes,
there's
great.
Cece.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you so much for being here. Can you hear us?
Can you hear me?
Hold on.
1 second.
Can you hear me, Quisquella?
Hold on 1 second. Let me see.
How about now?
Could you speak one more time?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, right. Okay, so I want to apologize. I'm saying your last name wrong, but you put Sissy.
It's okay.
Okay. Call you Dimitri, Sissy Dimitri. Are we okay? And then say your last name for me.
Hello?
Say your last name for me.
Mukanyirigira.
Okay.
Okay.
Is it wrong? But I will keep working at it. Thank you so much for being here. She's coming in from Vienna, Austria. She has an illustrious career. She's decided to go back and get a PhD I want to just read a little bit of all of the amazing things that she has done. Here is a book that she's published, and I read it. It's a beautiful book. I'm going to donate one copy to the library here. You are a speaker. You wrote this wonderful book. You are now a PhD candidate for the University of Vienna, Austria. It's just amazing. This is a really long list of things that she's done and she's accomplished in her life, and she's just beautiful. She sat with me and spoke with me at a coffee shop when I was in Rwanda last year, and she gave me a copy of her book. I read it. We spoke for, I think, an hour where I was just inspired by you and all of the things that you wanted to do. And then I was like, why do you want to get a PhD now? But you said yes, you wanted to do it. She holds a Master's of Business Administration and Project Management from the Oklahoma Christian University, Master of Science in Gender and Development from the University of Rwanda. She's worked with the World Bank for the last 20 years. She's one of the founding members of the VUCA organization, umbrella of genocide survivors associations, and remains an active member of genocide survivors associations in Rwanda and abroad. Oh my Lord. She's a member of the Rotary Club and a graduate of Women International. And in her free time, she enjoys music, dancing, sports, and reading. She also has 5 children, right? Yes. She also enjoys having motivational, and she does motivational coaching and talk. And she inspired me from just the moment that I sat with her. So I would love to just hand it over to you to speak, to introduce yourself, any reflections you have on the topic, or just in general. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah, thank you so much, Quisquella, and hi, everyone. I'm so happy and honored actually to be part of this discussion, and thank you very much. She said all of it. I'm a Rwandese genocide survivor, and who has been living in Rwanda, born and raised in Rwanda. This is the first time I'm actually living outside, and yeah, that's all. I'm doing my PhD now in ecosystem restorations. So it's a kind of shift from gender and social to environment, which is also a very interesting topic for me. I think I need to update my LinkedIn and my CV from women's issues. I'm going to see nature and trees, and which actually go together. So quickly on the topic, thank you, Quisquella, for involving me. Last year in 2024, when we were commemorating the genocide against the Tutsi, 30th commemoration, I wrote an article called in Kinyarwanda, Nari Mpari. Nari Mpari simply meaning I was there. So it's a kind of testimony of someone who was there since during the genocide and after the genocide, and who can actually testify about the transformation, not only the economic transformation, but also the social and individual transformation that actually made it possible. If Rwanda is where it is today, it's also a big part of all of us. We as individuals, I believe we moved together with the country, making it happening, everyone at his or her level, and working together through that trust and that shared common goals and missions, under the strong leadership and the political will, we all made it happen. So I'm here to testify, but also to proudly say that I was there, not in any political position, not in a donor or international partners position, but in a local citizen, survivor, actually very vulnerable survivor, but also as beneficiary and agent of change. I will start by a fact. In 94 December, Rwanda life expectancy was 29 years. Today, it is 69 years. So throughout the number, you can see a kind of stabilization. So that stabilization came from all fronts, starting by the social fabric that has to be restored to the economical stability. The GDP per capita in 94 was 150 American dollar. Today, as of 2024 December, it was between 900 and 1,000 American dollar. So all those, the numbers are there to show how the gap was, and then how many efforts we did to reach there. And the last one, because I'm a mother of 5, like she said, the maternal mortality rate was 1,300 per 100,000 in 94, and today it is only 203. So on all the fronts, we have worked a lot. And what actually made it possible was also the trust. So back to the trust. This topic was actually on building trust and also keeping the communities in the center of any development effort. I used to tell my colleagues that after the genocide, we used to work for free. We actually worked for free for some days and months. And when we improved, we worked for food. Now it became a work for food. And you can imagine as Rwandans who were in the country like me, I was young, I was actually 20 years old, still a student. But in that situation, when everything else was destroyed, and we were happy to welcome people coming from the neighboring countries, like my other colleagues said, they all came, to find Rwanda after 30 years of exile, and now find Rwanda destroyed. So the few of us who survived the genocide were there to welcome them, but also show the way. And if you can imagine, before the genocide, all the Tutsis and probably the lower classes were very excluded from the development agenda. So we didn't have anything to show, but confidently I was like, come, I will show you the ministries. I will show you the banks. I will show you the streets, because I was in Kigali. That is why I was living. That's why I was born. And, for me, taking a hand of someone who is coming from Kenya and who has a degree, who worked in Kenya or in Uganda or in Tanzania, they are smart, they are happy to come back to home, but they don't know anything. So we were like very happy to show them the way, work for free, and then we worked for food. At the end of the day, they could just give you maize or some sugar or rice to go home. And there was no complaint because there was nothing to share. The bank's national treasury was empty, banks were empty, documents destroyed, ministries, everything was really totally destroyed, and there was chaos. It was only chaos in Rwanda. So from that work for food to today, to actually through the years when we had to now deal with the community of development partners, the donors, go through the rule of law, put back the administration, hire people, then have money, start working, and do some, put a lot of efforts in agriculture, have something to put on the food. That was the really emergency and humanitarian phase. Have the refugees come back, deal with the justice, because perpetrators were still mixed with survivors, and they could sometimes come back and kill you because they were fearing that you will, you request for justice. So that situation was very fragile. But again, with the administration you had to work on all fronts. So throughout all those fragility and vulnerability, trust was really necessary. And like I said, trust between among us as Rwandans who just committed, there was just a genocide, perpetrators and victims, have them live together and rebuild the trust between them. That was like a social trust. And then from the government, from the top authorities to us, population, normal citizens, ordinary citizens, have that trust of, like being ready all the time to show the way, being ready to make any sacrifice that is necessary to work and have something happen. And that was an area, an era of building patriotism again, and building unity and reconciliation, but again, trust. Trust was essential to make it happen. So how can I trust my neighbor if he or she is a perpetrator? And then if the government asks me to forgive or to live with someone who did very wrong to me, how do I trust that same government? So I think from individual to institutions, we went through a lot of lessons, but we chose to be, to have that trust, that confidence, that sense of responsibility, and feel that it has to start with us. And that government, that people who will come down to us and say, what do you think is a priority? How can we define priorities together? What are the needs? So that was before, like the 10 years after the genocide, having trust between all of us, citizens among themselves, citizens with the government, and then welcome the international community as donors, as partners, development partners who will help us. So that is where I also go move and work share my experience with working with international organizations. And of course, when they come, when we go and when the UN, I worked for UNDP 10 years, and if they come, the first thing was to consult the government. What are your needs? And then the government also go down at the grassroots to see what are the real needs in Rwanda. And those needs change depending on the space, and context. The needs, for instance, in Bugesera, which is the eastern province, will be like the lack of water, for instance. But in the same time, the needs in the north will be probably like fertilizers. So from down to top, people, citizens express the needs. And then together with the government, with the local authorities, we also do the priorities, the priorities. And from those priorities, the international community will be guided and directed to what to do, to where to put money, And again, as partners, I remember there was a period when some international organization could put like conditions on their aid, and Rwanda government, because of the lessons and experiences of the genocide and all the discrimination that was before, couldn't accept. So that was also like a crisis. Some international development partners can come and say, if we did this and it worked in Haiti, why not in Rwanda? So that can't work in Rwanda because of the lessons we had from the past, from the very hard past. There were things that Rwandans we cannot tolerate, or we can't actually accept to go through, whatever the price, whatever the cost. So keeping the citizen the communities, the local communities in the center of every decisions, but also encouraging people to trust you, to trust your authority, trust your administration, but at the same time also trust your neighbors and work together was very key in the social, economical, sustainable development we see today. Something else I will mention is that through all the community meetings and consultations and discussions, and also basing on the norms and culture, background and beliefs, that is when and where Rwanda found what we call homegrown solutions, like the gacaca. You all know gacaca. Gacaca traditional court was based on the culture, on how people used to settle their dispute in the past, and facing a big issue of justice after the genocide, and having all the prisons filled with people who can actually come back and work instead of waiting for the international standardized justice and in the courts, hiring judges that we didn't have enough by that time. So the gacaca traditional courts came in as homegrown solutions taken from the culture and the very past experience. And it was very benefic because many people were actually helped a lot. Gacaca courts were very important for us, for all Rwandans, for the government to have back these people and be in activities for economic profit and development, but also for us, for the survivors to know, actually to have a lot of information on how the genocide was done. If today I know how they killed my brother, and someone from that prison come and show me where he was put, and I go through the morning, and that is how we did all the memorials we see today. It was all through gacaca because they were able now to talk. They were able to ask for forgiveness, but also give all the information, all the details for also survivors to be able to move on, to forgive, and that helps a lot the reconciliation process. So another quick fact I will probably say here is also education. The education level, we had very, very low educated people from university before the genocide, and today we have a lot of private universities. Access to education is free. Basic education is now a right for everyone, and then people who are educated, who can create jobs, who can take the development agenda into their hands, is also a very big progress to share. And I don't know if I still have time, but also the umuganda or community work that we do is also a way of back to the trust. Is also a way of building trust with your neighbors. Every Saturday the last Saturday of the month, we all get together where we live and we do community work, cleaning the areas, or depending on what we have on the agenda. Sometimes we go planting the trees. Some other times we go like help the most vulnerable in our communities. But every time after Muganda, you have to meet. You have an hour of meeting, and in that hour of meetings, that is where we share all the issues from home to the country. So that also is very important in the building trust to keep everyone updated. So throughout Umuganda community work, we also get people updated on the shared and the common goals, and everyone is motivated for his or her own efforts contribution, and that teamwork also, team spirit comes in. So I think the time we gave me is I think I said the maximum I could say, but I welcome any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We have open to reflections. I hope this comes together. I hope you can see some of the synergies between the idea of community, small, local, sustainable economic development, and also what you're learning in the classroom. But if people have any questions, I know we only have 3 minutes. we can open them up.
I do have a question. Thank you so much, Cece, for what you shared. My name is Antoinette. I'm one of the professors here. It's so inspirational to hear how you, as a people, as a country, were able to come together after that horrific period of time and rebuild. And you emphasize trust quite a bit, that was critical to the success that is existing today. And you listed a number of different things that helped to build the trust. I would love to have your perspective on of those different things that the country and people have done to build trust. What do you think was the most helpful for restoring trust, particularly among neighbors, for perpetrators versus with the victims, being asked now to come together and move forward? I can't imagine what that must have felt like. So I'm asking from your perspective, what really helped for people to move past that, to get to this place of greater trust and community?
Yes, thank you very much for your question. I think we all took the motivation from the genocide and the killings. The genocide against the Tutsi actually humbled us and very down, very deep. It's that feeling of loss, of lives and of international community attentions, and the feeling of being alone against huge work to do. On the cost was too heavy, if I can say. The cost was too heavy, and the commitment came from that, because every Rwandan who was alive during the genocide 31 years ago lost people, lost confidence, lost hope. Personally, I like to say that we can count our people dead. We can also count infrastructure destroyed, roads, buildings, schools, hospitals. But there is something that we can't count, we can't quantify. We cannot quantify what we lost in terms of humanity and hope. Like what does life means after the genocide, after what you saw in 94? What else is left to start with, or to doubt of yourself, or to wait for some people's aid or attention or care? It was a mix of heavy cost, but also a way of sitting down and redefine who you are, actually, who you are. I am who you are vis-a-vis others, and then the humanity in general. If what was done happens again, when actually we teach Ndi Umunyarwanda, probably Quisquella knows, when we redefine the national identity in the terms of one Rwandan, one human being in Rwanda, and what do we share in common, is a way of having new generations ready to to remain together, to remain together and to work together and to actually have that trust, we said, and to protect at any cost that unity. And again, after all of that is done, justice, unity, reconciliation, and now what is next? We don't also want to remain poor. We also want to dream big. We also want to move on. We also want to try things. That is how innovation comes in. That is how we try to compare ourselves with the biggest. If Singapore did this, why not Rwanda? So it's a kind of a new commitment to go as far as possible. That is why at 53 years I just want to go for a PhD. Why not me? So it's a kind of it's a kind of personal, individual thinking, which is also at a national level something we are inheriting from our leadership, and I hope that we are also transmitting to our kids and the new generations. I don't know if I responded to you. But that is how I see the motives behind all of that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so let's this has been very informative, and we look forward to hearing the results from the project when we come back, so maybe we can do another session and also have CC back. So this is really fantastic. Thank you all for coming. If you haven't had lunch, please grab one. If you had one, you can take one for later. But thank you again, and we'll be in touch. Thank you.